Hello, my name is Annie and I'm a school nurse who works for OM Health and Wellbeing Consultancy. We were asked to create a series of 6 videos, and the first 5 have all been aimed at your children, your teenagers that are currently at home. This video is really aimed for you as parents. How do you talk to your teenagers? How can you communicate with them? And how do you survive as a parent with teenagers at home all the time? Being a teenager is really about that slow, gradual process of growing away from your family and becoming really an independent being in your own right. And actually, parents and family become less and less important and peers start to take their place. And what we found in this current crisis is that teenagers have been thrust back into family life and thrust back into living within that family environment, whether they want to or not. And social distancing and self-isolating is bringing challenges for everybody, but actually for teenagers, they're finding it particularly hard at the moment, and it is particularly difficult for them to be able to follow those rules. And with schools closed, they're actually cut off from the people that matter the most to them, because as much as we might want to feel like as parents we matter the most, actually for teenagers, as part of their normal development, it's their friends that matter the most. And there may well have been that initial euphoria about the fact that they're not at school anymore and they don't have to do exams. But what will be happening is that slow realisation that it also means that they're missing all those things that happen at the end of a school year. You know, they're missing the socialisation, they're missing sports activities, they're missing, you know, the end of year prom, the end of year competitions within the school. They're missing flirting with their friends and the social gatherings that they're used to. On top of all of that, they're being forced now to spend all of their time with you, their parents. And this is at a time when really they want to grow independent and to grow away from their parents. And suddenly what's happening is they've got less control than they've ever had before. So how can you help? Well, firstly, it's important to realise that children pick up on how adults feel and they mirror your behaviour. You know, if you remain calm and rational, they will pick up their cues from you and they will be calm and rational. Remember, you need to look after your own well-being. You know, it's a bit like that old oxygen mask analogy. If you've ever been on a plane, if you are involved in something where the oxygen masks drop down, the first thing that they say to you is that you need to put your own oxygen mask on first before you put anybody else's on. And that's really important about well-being. You need to be looking after your own well-being and making sure that you're good to be able to actually then support your child or your children to be able to have positive well-being of their own. Feeling guilty is not helpful, and I know it's quite hard to avoid sometimes, because it almost feels that parenting comes with its own little package of guilt about, are you doing it right? Are you getting everything right? But actually guilt is not helpful. And I think it's important to think about, at the moment, it almost feels like the government is setting all the rules and is almost like becoming the parent, and actually that makes you feel much more like the child. So you need to try and take back some of that control. And taking back some of that control, one of the ways to do that is that, you know what, teenagers really like to know and understand about what's happening to them, and it will help you as well to have an understanding actually about what's going on. So explain it to them. So what's going on in their brain and in your brain? And I think it's a really good idea to use something which is called the hand model of the brain. So what you think about is that this part of the arm coming up into the hand is like the spinal cord. And then this section here in the palm is the brainstem. And the brainstem is the part of the brain which controls all of the stuff that just happens automatically that we don't have to think about, like breathing, like your heartbeat. Then this section, the thumb, if you tuck it over so that it's there connected to the brainstem, because they are really connected. This part of the brain, the thumb represents the limbic system. That's really connected to the brainstem. But the limbic system and the brainstem work together. And what they do is they are really responsible for regulating emotion. And together, they control the fight, flight, freeze response that we all have when we are faced with some sort of danger. Then the fingers, if we just fold them over, those parts of the brain, the fingers represent the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So this is the part of the brain which is rational, considered, reasonable, and offers flexibility of thinking and connection with other people. It's this part of the brain that regulates and controls all the other parts of the brain. And if you think about it side on, this is exactly how it looks. This part here is the part which represents the prefrontal cortex. I think that as the parent and as the adult, the big thing to realise is that for most of your young people, this prefrontal cortex, this front part of the brain, as I said, which is rational, considered, is a bit like the executive functioning part of the brain, does not fully develop until you reach around 25, 26. And so what starts to happen when you feel stressed or angry or anxious? Chemicals start to bubble up and travel to your brain. Chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. And what they do is they start to make this part of your brain sort of flip, and actually it's a bit like a pressure cooker, and it makes you flip your lid. So actually you're not being reasonable anymore, and what's in control now is this limbic part of the brain, which means that you can't make good decisions, you can't think clearly, you can't listen to anybody else, because by the time this has happened and you flipped your lid, actually all reasoning has gone out of the window. By the time this has happened, you've lost all capacity to be able to think straight. You know, you've really gone off on one. And what we really need to think about is, how do we get that prefrontal cortex to connect again, to connect with the other parts of the brain, and actually for that to come back into control and be really more balanced. Because when you are balanced, actually you're really well regulated, your emotions are well regulated, and you feel calm and you're able to make good choices. Once you've flipped your lid, actually you're totally dysregulated at this time, you're off balance, you can't think flexibly, and this is when you're having a big meltdown. And you know what? Flipping your lid happens to adults as much as it happens to children. But with you as the adult, you have a greater ability, because you have more control over your prefrontal cortex, to be able to make sure that you don't get to that point where you flip your lid. You're the one that needs to stay calm and needs to stay regulated, because by you doing that, it's more likely that your child is going to be able to maintain that calmness and keep a handle on their emotions. Another tool that I use to explain what's going on inside your mind when you flip your lid is when I use something that I call your glitter mind. And I've used this on the video, I think it's video number 2, that your young people have had the opportunity to watch. You know, when your glitter is settled like this, Actually, the prefrontal cortex is totally in control. You can think straight, make good choices, make good decisions. You can hear what people are saying to you. You can learn, you can concentrate. You know, when your glitter goes all over the place, actually what that then means is that your amygdala, that limbic part of your brain, is in control, and actually you flipped your lid at this point. This is a great visual way to talk to children about what's going on inside their mind. And they like the idea that actually you need to wait for the glitter to settle to be able to make any good decisions. And if you're interested in making a glitter mind, if you go onto our website, www.omhwc.org.uk, there's a really short video clip about how to make your own glitter mind. So that's 2 great ways to have a conversation about what's going on in their head, in their mind, when they start to feel overwhelmed with feelings. One of the most important things is about talk to your children. You know what? Encourage them to take control by structuring their days and thinking about setting themselves their own goals. Take a minute and just think, just put yourself into their shoes and try to see things from their point of view, because that will really help you to understand more about where they're coming from. It's really important that you give them some space. And I know that that might be really tricky in some households, but if they can get, even if it's not a physical space because you haven't got room, giving them space in terms of letting them walk away, letting them go outside without you following them, give them some space to be able to think about their emotions and think about, you know, what their reactions and their responses are. If you can give them some physical space, you know, their own bedroom, their own room, think about, you know, just think about respecting that. So knocking on the door before you go in, you know, give them that respect that you would expect them to give you. Try to avoid yelling at them. You know, I think I certainly have had teenage children, and I know that if we ever got into that yelling match, actually, you know, we would all just keep on going and going and going, and you end up just going up and up and up, because I have yet to find a teenager who will stop the yelling before the adult does. And you know what, if you're up there as well, that basically means that as the adult you've flipped your lid by then, because you're out of control. And as you go up and you get higher and higher and higher, actually by the time you get up to this point, the glitter's all over the place. You've both flipped your lids. You know, neither of you can have a considered and reasonable conversation. In fact, at that point, neither of you can probably hear each other or hear what each other is saying. So what you need to do is you need to wait for everything to calm down. You know, your glitter needs to have settled. You need to be back in control again, as do they. You need to be in a calm place to be able to have that conversation. It's a bit like if they're up here, they've gone into that terror alarm, that fight, flight, freeze mode. And you know what? We never negotiate with terrorists. And that's where they are when they're up here. They are a terrorist. And you need to wait until they have come down and are in a better place and position, when their minds have settled, and when they have, you know, got back into control again, to have that conversation about what's been going on for them. Be the parent. You know, children feel safe no matter how old or how young they are. They feel safe when there are rules, routines and boundaries in place at home. Your children have enough friends of their own, and they really don't need you to be another friend. What they really need is for you to be the parent, for you to put the rules and the routines in place with their, you know, depending on their age, with them having some input into that, But there needs to be a really clear understanding about if the rules are broken, what are the consequences and the expectations for everybody in the household about what is the consequence if that rule is broken. They really need you to be the parent to keep them safe. And they need you to put the boundaries in place to stop spoiling them. You know, I think it's sometimes hard as a parent to say no, but think about it. Saying no is not about putting a barrier up. Stopping from spoiling them is not about putting a barrier up. Actually, think about it more that boundaries are a bit like putting your arms around them to keep them safe. So it's okay to say no. And finally, you really need to pick your battles. You know, through the teenage years, if you decide you're just going to battle everything, and actually you're going to just have years and years of ongoing battles. So it's worth spending some time and deciding what is really important to you, and then decide, actually, I am going to battle about that one because that means a lot to me. So pick your battles really carefully, because if you don't, you're just going to find that you're going to be warring through the whole of their teenage years. So what helps? Talk to them and ask them what they think helps them. And in the series of videos that we've done that they've been able to watch, we've used various different strategies that they've seen, which you ask them about them. Think about asking them. So some of the things that we've talked about are different breathing techniques. We've talked about feel your feet. We've talked about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you know what? They're all techniques which are designed just to help them not to flip their lid. So if you haven't watched them, watch them for yourself if you can, but talk to them about what they've seen and what things they think really helps them. And once they've identified the things that do help them, the things that they think really make a difference, get them to practice when they don't feel overwhelmed. Get them to practice when they feel calm. So when their glitter's settled, when they're very calm and their prefrontal cortex is engaged. Because the more that they practice these things when they feel calm, the easier it will be for them to then pick those things up and use them when they start to feel overwhelmed. I like to think about it as a bit like giving them a mental toolbox. And within that toolbox, we need to give them various tools that they can use at different times that might help them when they're about to flip their lid or their glitter's about to go all over the place. You know, and if you think about a toolbox, you wouldn't be able to pick up a screwdriver for the first time and use it in a hurry if there was an emergency. You need to practice with it so that you get the hang of how to using it. And that's exactly the same with the tools that we're talking about, that are the strategies and tips that might help them from not flipping their lid. Get them to look at some of the websites and apps that we have recommended for them. Things like Smiling Mind, which is an app and website which is free to use, but get them to go on, look at it together. Get them to, show you what that they like about it. Or Headspace is the other app that we've recommended. So you get the first 10 sessions lasting 10 minutes for free, but then there is a cost involved in being able to carry on using Headspace. But, Smiling Mind is a perfect free alternative. What we really need is that we need children to start to learn for themselves what they need to do to get that prefrontal cortex to connect again with the rest of the brain. They need to learn to self-soothe. As the parent, it's your job to make the world better for them, or you try as much as you can. But you know what? You're not going to be with them all the time. And what we really need is to give them the skills to be able to just get that mind, that prefrontal cortex to connect with the rest of the brain again and learn how to soothe themselves once they've actually flipped their lid. They really need to learn for themselves about what works for them, because you know what, something that might work for you doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work for them. So they need to find their own thing and get them to start identifying all of the things that make them feel better. So what about homeschooling? Because I think parents are currently feeling a lot of pressure on themselves to become the teacher, to become the person that is responsible for their education. So these are my top tips about things for you to remember as the adult and as the parent. Prioritise the things that are fun. You know what? Children don't want their parents to be teachers, even if you are a teacher by profession, because actually at home, you're their parent, you're not their teacher. You know, it's not about putting things in, it's about bringing things out. It's about asking questions. It's about being openly curious about them. It should be a really natural process, especially when you're doing it at home. Get them to practice a little bit of gratitude. You know, I'm a great believer that what we need to be doing with our children is we need to get them at the end of every day, just before they're about to go to sleep, to identify what have been the 3 best things about today, the 3 most positive things, the 3 favourite things from the day. Because if you get them to do that just before they're about to go to sleep, what then happens is their brain processes that positive stuff overnight. And if you do it with them every single night over a period of time, it starts to just change their mindset and make them feel much more positive about life in general. And, you know, I've had teenagers, I've worked with teenagers, and quite often if you say to a teenager, come on, what's been the most positive thing today? The response that you may well receive from them is like, oh, there's been nothing positive about today. And you know what, that's normal, that's natural. And if they are struggling to find something to identify as positive, get them to think about what are 3 things that they're grateful for. You know, what are 3 things that they are thankful for? And get them to do that at the end of every day. Get them to teach you. You know what? Children and young people love to be the expert, love to be the one that have got all the knowledge and are keen to teach you about things. You know, get them to teach you about technology, because, you know, if you're anything like me, when I get a new phone, I just hand it to one of my children and they get it all sorted for me. You know, they know a lot about technology. Tune in and hone in on the things that they're experts in and get them to teach you about that. Sit down with them and get them to teach you how to play Minecraft or whatever game it is that they are into, because they will love being the expert and teaching you. It's worth noting that, you know, if you've got both parents at home, actually both parents can look after children, and it's worth thinking about how you're going to split that responsibility between both of you if you are both at home, both trying to work from home, but also have the children with you. So, you know, it doesn't just have to be one parent. I think it's also really important to think about, it may be time that you need to relax some of your rules around screen time. You know, I've talked about the importance in the videos that I've made for them about them being able to connect with other people. And at the moment, that has to be virtual. And that has to be via technology. So be a little bit more flexible, relax the rules a little bit about the amount of screen time that they may be allowed. If you are going to teach them anything, teach your children to do things for all of you as a family. Get them to cook a meal with you. Get them to bake a cake with you. Get them to write a letter to their grandparents. You know, it's all about doing some really simple, mindful activities. You know, mindfulness is a great way that to reduce stress, to actually stop you from feeling out of control. And all of the grounding techniques that we've talked about, that I've talked about to your children, are all grounding techniques which are really simple techniques around mindfulness. And if you can do some mindfulness which involves touch, that would be absolutely fantastic. You know, my last top tip for you as parents is that touch is hugely powerful. Whether, if they'll let you give them a hug, then great. If they want to hug themselves, but, having that skin to skin contact, hold their hand, get them to hold their own hand. Get some hand cream and do a hand massage. On one of the videos we have a guide to do a brief hand reflexology massage. All of those things are amazing because touch releases a hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is known as that warm, loving chemical which creates that feeling of social connection and also well-being. So touch is really, really powerful. And if you can some way incorporate that into your daily interaction with your children, that would be, a really, really amazingly powerful thing to do, which is positive for their well-being. So I hope that you have found some of this information useful, helpful, that you're going to give some of it a go. It's not easy, teenagers are not easy at the best of times when they're going to school, but with them being at home all of the time, it is really difficult. And you know what, you're doing a good job, you really are. So hopefully you'll put some of these tips that I've given you into practice. My name is Annie. This is OM. Thank you so much for watching.